Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is so fun to see that so many of you have joined us today for what promised to be a very enlightening workshop with Dr. Mark Brackett, who I will introduce momentarily. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jane Feinberg. I'm founder and principal of Full Frame Communications, which together with our cherished partner, the Center for Collaborative Education, directs the Essex County Learning Community, or the ECLC as we have fondly come to call it. The ECLC is generously funded by the Peter and Elizabeth C. Tower Foundation, with additional funding from the Essex County Community Foundation. We have some trustees and staff from these two great organizations here with us today. You hear me say it often, but I have to say it again. Thank you for enabling us to do such meaningful work. On behalf of our team, I want to formally welcome you all, those of you who are members of the ECLC, as well as other educators and service providers in Essex County who are joining us for the first time. So we hope this is for those of you who are here for the first time, that this is the first of many future touch points. And for those of you who are members, we are always really happy to see you. And we want to thank you all for serving our children with such dedication and creativity during this perilous time. We see what you're doing, and we are in awe. It is the ECLC's mission to serve you, educators and providers, in your quest to better meet the diverse learning assets and needs of young people in Essex County. You know, we've always known that the job of an educator is challenging and multifaceted, but the events of this past year make it oh so clear that the lift is even heavier now. And so the ECLC is designed as a holding environment for educators. We open up the time and the space that's pretty much impossible for you to give yourselves, given the fire hose you're drinking out of. So we want to give you time for deep learning, for reflection, which is critically important, and for relationship building within and across districts, which allows for educators' wisdom and talent to shine. We don't want anybody's talent to go unoptimized. It is our firm belief, and this is really our theory of change, that when you guys get what you need, so do your students. So today we're gathered to benefit from decades of work that Dr. Mark Brackett has contributed to understanding the role of emotions in learning. He does research, he's a research arm of his shop, and he is dedicated to bringing the research into the field. And I've known Mark for a number of years, and his dedication is deep, and he has a great brain and a big heart. So I'm really happy to welcome him. He is the author of this fabulous book, Permission to Feel. He's also the founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor at the Yale Child Study Center at the Yale School of Medicine, which has a very storied and wonderful history. Mark, is that all right? Dr. Brackett, okay, I'm so used to calling you Mark, it just slipped out. Distinguished scientist on the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, and serves also on the board of directors for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. You guys all know CASEL and SEL. A winner of many awards, too many to mention here. Mark has been the keynote speaker at over 500 conferences around the world, including the White House, the U.S. Departments of Education, Justice, and Defense, and the New York Times, Google, Microsoft, everybody else. So any major institution, Mark has touched it. He's the lead developer of Ruler, which many of you have heard about or probably are working with. It's an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning. It's been adopted by over 2,000 public, charter, and private preschool through high schools across the US and in several other countries. He also consults with many Fortune 500 companies to integrate the principles of emotional intelligence into training and product design. And this is my favorite fact. He holds a 5th degree black belt in Hapkido, a Korean martial art, and you'll have to read his book to understand why he took that on, but it's a very intriguing fact about you, Mark. He is going to talk with us today about why emotions matter in school and in life and how to harness them for good. As the last year has taught us, emotions and learning are inextricably linked, so it really behooves all of us, as Mark says, to remake education so that it includes emotion skills. So take it away, Dr. Brackett. We welcome you with open arms. Sure.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just what you were looking for, another Zoom meeting. But hopefully this one will be, where you get to just sit back and enjoy and participate and not have to be too cognitively burden to make sure that your students are engaged in the learning process, or whatever work you do. So Jane, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. And I think I'll just share my slides because that's what you do these days. And just give me a thumbs up if you can see them. Okay, great. So you heard from Jane, my background. My day job is I'm a psychologist. My night job is I'm a self-psychologist. I'm a family psychologist. And most of my work is in school systems. So Ruler is the approach that we have created at our center that is now in over 3,000 schools. And we're constantly doing research on that process. But most recently, my research has been focusing on educators like yourselves. So we have a national study that we've done that is now, I think we have 35,000 educators across the United States who have participated. And we're just trying to understand, what are the emotional lives like of our teachers? And so I'm going to make that available to you if you'd like to participate at the end of our presentation. If you're interested in social media, I like to use social media for change, positive things, not like some people have used it over the last couple of years. And so those are my handles, and that's my website. So given, I don't know, maybe you're like me at the end of 2020, like how many of you were saying, I cannot wait for 2021? And then 2021, the first 2 weeks, it's like, maybe I want to go back to 2020. And you're just like, is this ever going to end? Are we ever going to get along? Am I ever going to be able to leave my home or feel safe? And so I wanted to open with this quote. And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. So just to get our brains activated and that we can all work together, I'd like you to start using the chat and sort of, just what came up for you? What does that make you think about? What does that quote kind of bring up for you in your role, in any role, family member, educator, counselor, teacher? We're always experiencing change and continuously growing. What else? One step at a time, stronger. Probably not going to go back to what it used to be. Reminds me, this is completely, I don't know where this thought came from, but early in my career, I worked in a clinic at Bellevue Hospital called the Dissociative Identity Disorder Clinic. And I worked with people who had, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different personalities. And the treatment wasn't like, there's no going back, like whoever that original person was. It was the integration, of these selves into a new self. And I kind of feel like I've had that going on these days. Yeah, we constantly change. I just want to share one little tidbit of research that was fascinating to me that has stuck with me. And not most of the studies that I do, we set hypotheses and you kind of expect the results. But this particular one, we had surprising findings, and it was on gratitude. So during the pandemic, I asked over 1,000 people, tell us, what are you grateful for right now? And for whatever reason, I was open-ended and we analyzed the data. And what we found was that most people said things, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my finances. I'm grateful that I have food and shelter. All what you might call expected. 99% of the responses were all kind of like what you call the canned responses. And what I found so fascinating was that no one really thought about the things that are behind their health and wellness. And what I mean by that is no one said something like, I'm grateful for doctors and first responders. I'm grateful for educators who are putting their lives at risk to help teach our kids. I'm grateful for the grocery store clerks, right, who have to go to work each day, or the bus drivers, or the people who are delivering our food. And for me, the one thing that has really changed for me is like, I'm a pretty good tipper because I was a waiter for most of my early life. I'm a little bit better tipper now. I'm also someone who says, like, thank you more. Realizing that I have the privilege of being safe in my home working, and not everybody does. And so, I don't know, that's one of my takeaways from this pandemic is just a lot more gratitude for the non-obvious things. And so many of you may have heard of Ruler. Maybe you've even read my book called Permission to Feel. And some of you may even have an app that we built called the Mood Meter app. Let me just get a quick, I'm curious, if you can raise your hand, how many of you are familiar with El Medidor Emocional? Can you give me a thumbs up or something? People have seen it, some of you? Okay. So maybe I'll do a quick refresher for you. So on the x-axis, it says the word pleasantness. All of you right now, it's what? You're all East Coasters. You're with me. It's 3:15. I don't even know how you're feeling, right? You've been working. It's Thursday. Thank God it's Friday tomorrow. So pleasantness, your brain, it's constantly making predictions. By the way, our brains are made not really to think so much, but to just like basically help us survive. And so emotions are core to our survival. When you think about it, has anyone ever worked with someone who like you felt like, I'm not going to survive working with this person because of their facial expressions and their body language? You're like, oh, like you wake up in the morning, you think of their face. Sorry to be so crude about this. And you're like, oh, because they, the disgruntled facial expressions, the disgust, the contempt, the anger, the whatever it is. And then do you ever meet someone who just like their mere presence makes you feel at ease? Isn't that amazing? Just, nothing about physical appearance. It's strictly about the energy, right, that they're exuding. And so that's what our brains are doing all the time. We are examining the world around us, and we're looking at people like I'm looking at all of you on Zoom, and I'm saying like, all right, Mark, is this safe? Can I approach? Or is like, uh-oh, let me just shut down and run away and avoid. On the y-axis says energy. Do I feel depleted of my resources, or do I feel energized? So I ask all of you right now, what color are you in today? Yellow, red, blue, or green? And you can type it into the chat. ¿Qué color? Got green, 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 yellow, green, 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 blue, green, yellow, green, blue. Lots of yellows and greens. Okay. Some blues. I'm going to give you 3 seconds. Can you convert your color to a feeling word, a specific feeling word? You got 3 seconds. 2, 1, go. Depleted, depleted. Satisfied, chill, anxious, tired but happy. Content, joyful. Tired, tired. Content, pleasant, relieved. Restful, happy. Quick question. How many of you found it was a little challenging kind of getting the precise feeling word? Did anyone notice that? Like to actually pinpoint the feeling word? It's not easy. Okay, next question. What are you going to do with your feelings? So do you want to keep the feeling you're having? Is it going to work for you for the next hour and 15 minutes as we go through this training? Or is that feeling interfering with your success and wellness right now? That's the first question. Is it going to help or hinder? If it's going to help, what's your strategy for maintaining it? How are you going to keep that feeling going? If it's going to kind of get in the way of your learning, what's your strategy for shifting? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to break out into groups for about 4 minutes, and you're going to be randomly assigned. So just be kind and to the person that you meet. And I'm going to ask you to answer 2 questions. The first is, what's your beliefs around why it's difficult to find the word? And then the second is, what do you believe is the most helpful strategy to support you in getting the most out of today's training? So we're going to go into the groups, and we're going to give 5 minutes to have you kind of do that. We'll do groups of 3 or 4. We'll come back and we'll debrief.
Everyone should be back now, Mark.
All right, thank you. All right, so first question. What was your hypothesis around the language piece? Why is it so hard for us to find the words? Anyone? You can, by the way, this is a Zoom meeting, so I think you can actually share vocally if you like.
Mark, sorry, I was
Danielle?
going to share, yeah. In our group, we talked about what we're feeling versus what we want to present. And it
Okay.
makes it difficult because we're grappling with the 2 of those.
Yeah, and with the mask on, it makes it harder to know what you're presenting, right? Which is interesting for the development of emotion perception skills, when you think about it.
We had
And
a
so what
similar
you're getting at, go ahead, Danielle, please.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say we had a similar thought. Well, I had a similar thought in our group that once you say it out loud, it's kind of it's very real. So it's like you have, if you label it, acknowledge it, then you do have to stop and move forward with processing whatever that is.
And so what happened? So what's up with that?
Well, I think personally, people are feeling like they don't have the time in the moment to process a lot of the emotions.
Yeah, so ask me how I'm feeling, Nicole.
How are you feeling, Mark?
Fine. That's what we're all we hope that's what people say, isn't it?
Right.
Or good. Ask me how I'm feeling again, Nicole.
How are you feeling, Mark?
Oh my gosh, Nicole. It's like this odd mixture of tired, overwhelmed, scared, anxious, and despair.
Tell me more.
Yeah, that was a very warm tell me more, let me tell you. And so, right, you think about it, is that question, how are you feeling? It's a loaded question. Or it can be a very compassionate question, depending on the type of person you are and how much investment you want to make into learning. So think about it. How are you feeling? First, you have to have the courage to ask it. Second, the person who you ask has to be comfortable sharing. Third, they have to have the vocabulary. Fourth, they have to expect that when they share, you're going to do something with it. Fifth, you actually have to know what to do with it. And so you can see how over time, we have become more, I see this all the time with educators, and not because of their cold hearts, but because I got to be on task, right? I don't have, I parents too. This is my fit for parents in the morning. Maybe if you're a parent, you'll recognize this. Like in the typical day when you used to drive to work, it's like 7:30. You got to leave the house at 7:45. Let's say do you dare ask your kid who looks a little off that morning how they're feeling? Because it's like, let me just get them on the bus, and that way I can go to work, and the teacher can figure that out. I didn't know that. You're all compassionate people. But, you know, I've had fathers and moms tell me things like, you know, I got 5 minutes to get ready. My kid's having a breakdown. You know, what am I supposed to do with that? It's hard because it's what the emotional experience is. And so this is why I think this work is so important, because I don't think our society as of yet has put tremendous value on the emotional lives of its people. We even say it, you know, feelings are weak. You know, one of my favorite strategies, I was doing a training in New York City schools, and the this one teacher goes, "Oh, I don't have feelings when I teach. I have feelings, but maybe I have them. But what I do is I just put them on the box and I leave them outside the school door." I'm like, really? I don't know how that works biologically speaking. You just like dissect your feelings and put them in a box and you pick them up on your way back home. Probably not going to work. And so many of us, I think, as the adults who are raising and teaching kids, let me just ask you, how many of you believe you've had an adequate, sophisticated, comprehensive education in emotion science, the skills of emotional intelligence to support you in having well-being and to support your children in developing those skills? A couple of people, they're like, you know, tell me what it is first, then I'll tell you if I've got it. And what I find is that's really the case, that we as a society have not valued these skills. We value math and science. That's why we spend so much time teaching it, English language arts. However, I don't know about you, but if you're a parent or just care about kids as a teacher, if I were to ask you the question, like, what do you want for the kids in your classroom when they're 25 years old? What would you say? You wouldn't say, I want them to have a perfect grade point average, right? I want them to know, you know, how to dissect a sentence. Is that even the term, dissecting a sentence? Diagram is a, see? Diagram a sentence. You're probably going to say things like what? I want them to be healthy. I want them to have well-being. I want them to be able to build and maintain healthy and positive relationships. I want them to be able to deal with life's obstacles and ups and downs and have resilience so they can achieve their dreams, to be safe. Does that resonate? But how much time do we dedicate, right, to the cultivation of the skills that are necessary for those life outcomes? Not very much. So by the way, that's your cheat sheet for the words. That's actually the inside cover of my book. Now, my next question for you is the words and the strategies. So what were the strategies? What did you find that were going to be the most helpful to you? Anyone want to share? What did you say in your group around the most helpful? Lynn?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I had put myself in green because it's the end of the day and I'm looking forward to going home. And this is a type of professional development that I enjoy. But the part that was holding me back is, I'm probably going to do it soon, is from sitting, we're teaching remote, being in the chair all day, my back is killing me.
Yeah.
And what I really need to do is just shut my camera off and stretch and listen at the same time and come back once I feel a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like pausing to do something I could immediately do to make myself feel better.
So are you, like, for example, doing your kind of what I'll call your physical self-care work throughout the day?
It's a habit I am trying to get into so that when we break, I try to, I mean, I'm all by myself in my room with the door shut. So, so when we break, I try to stretch, do some simple yoga moves that can be done, you know, in sneakers and clothes to just make my body feel better. And if my body feels better, I feel more grounded.
Totally. Makes sense. Other strategies that people talked about. One more group. Helpful strategies. It's okay to share. Come on.
I know that for me personally, I talk to myself. So a lot of self-talk of like, it'll be okay, or it's hard now, but like thinking back to another time, or talking with other people and telling them how I'm feeling, and not unloading on them, because I know sometimes they might not be able to handle that load, but communicating in that way as well.
So some good positive self-talk.
Yes.
How many of you, by the way, I'm just curious, since the pandemic began, have engaged in self-criticism? Anyone? Any negative self-talkers? It's like amazing to me. I'm like, I'm supposed to be an expert in this field, and I don't even know what that even means anymore. And I'm like, Mark, come on, you're going to be positive this week. You're going to be positive. And so the other day I get up, I start exercising in the morning. I'm trying to work out in the mornings, and I'm looking, I had shorts on, and it's the winter. I look at my, excuse me for saying this, my pale legs, and I'm like, oh, you're so pale. And then I started doing crunches, and I'm like, oh, you're never going to have a flat stomach. And then, oh, my lower back hurts. And within the first 30 seconds of my being awake, I had trashed myself in the morning. And it's like, and then I immediately was like, Mark, you made a commitment to be kind to yourself. Remember, self-compassion is better than self-criticism. But let me tell you, it is hard work. Does that resonate with people? And it's fascinating to me how we don't need to get graduate degrees, in self-criticism. There's just like, it's just like you get it as a gift of growing up in America. And so much of our negative self-talk is cultivated from our early childhood, isn't it? The way our parents spoke to us, the way our peers treated us. And I've become convinced, when you really think about it, if you think about how the brain operates, that if you think about the old adage, what fires together wires together, that how much rehearsal and training over the course of our life we've had in being mean and cruel to ourselves, and how little time we spend finding ways to reverse that and be self-compassionate. And so we just have so many more neurons. When something goes wrong, it's like accessible really fast, right? All the negative self-talk. Whereas the positive, though, it's like, look, oh yeah, like 10 years ago, I said something really kind to myself. But like, it takes a lot longer for your brain to find that than it does the negative stuff. And so I ask you again, how much time do we dedicate to flipping our self-talk, to helping our kids, evaluate, like compassionate scientists, their self-talk? Okay. Now, I think all of these things that I'm talking about today are compounded by the pandemic. What I mean by that is that what we know from COVID is that parents are freaked out, kids are externalizing more, 8 times more likely to report mental distress. And if you really go deep into the data and look in our BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, we see great inequities as a result of the coronavirus, from greater likelihood to contract the virus for a variety of reasons, many of which are about being essential workers, greater need for food and shelter, less access to quality health care. And we know mortality rates are, actually the data are stronger now. They're about 3 times more likely to die of the coronavirus if you are a person of color than if you're a white person. And so what I share these data because I think it's important for us to acknowledge that giving ourselves strategies is an equity issue. Getting strategies is an equity issue. And if we don't think of it as an equity issue, right, it means that we're just going to continue to do what we've always been doing. So I've been very interested in, how are you doing as teachers? And so number of studies, one right after the pandemic hit in March, April, to one over the summer. The top emotions of educators, anxiety. Does that resonate with people? Now, when I asked educators over the summer, how do you want to feel come the fall semester or, September? It was very interesting. I want to feel confident. I want to feel excited. Makes sense because, anxiety is about uncertainty. So confidence, right? People are feeling overwhelmed and frustrated and down. Makes sense that they want to feel excitement. But what was really interesting to me is that about 4 months ago, like in October, November, we asked teachers the same question, and it looked totally different. Nobody said excited or confident. Well, some people said confident, but excited was not really big. The number one word was appreciate. I'm just curious from your perspective, does that resonate as a teacher? Why is the feeling of appreciation so critical right now for teachers? Anyone willing to share their thoughts about that? I'm very curious personally. Why would the number one word that educators said they want to feel be appreciated?
I think that teachers aren't feeling appreciated. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we went from parents growing to appreciate teachers to now we're hearing more and more of the negative comments. And I think that so parents have, in our community, a few parents are trying to show that appreciation, but I think because they're hearing so much negative, and focusing on the negative, that we have to focus on appreciating all the hard work that they're doing.
Yeah, thank you. One other person, what do you think?
Also, we don't do it for the money. So we want to feel like the energy we put in and that we're making a difference and that the families appreciate our hard work.
That's right. Teachers get into the profession or leave the profession because of the salaries, right? You leave it because of relationships generally, like about how you feel about showing up for work each day and how you're treated.
I also think it means something perhaps broader, which is the totality of what we bring to the job. We have a role that we play, but we are people. And I think the pandemic shifted that a little bit, including the perceptions of the parents, because now they also expected perhaps things not to change so much for the teachers, right? So you still expected to do things as before when teachers are trying very hard, trying to learn actually how to do their jobs in a whole different way. And within, I think all of us, we have strengths and weaknesses. And I think the appreciation also maybe refers to appreciate for who I am. In some parts of who I am may not be as competent, or not because we are incompetent, because we may not feeling yet comfortable with teaching online, or because we have to figure it out how to do this teaching. I think it goes to that deeper level of being human. I think sometimes they got a little bit disconnected.
Yeah, we have these basic human needs to be seen, to be heard, to have our needs met. And when they're not, we don't function very well. We're not horses, right? That just like they're born and they start running away, right? We need nurturing. Thank you. So let's put this together. If you look at the data on the mood meter, it looks like we got a lot of red and blue, not a lot of yellow and green. When we ask people, how do you want to feel? A lot of them say yellow and green. But how realistic is that, right? Like, anybody ever get annoyed with anybody who's like, we call it like toxically positive person? Everything's fine. Fabulous. You know, I'm doing great. I'm like, well, go blank yourself. I'm not doing so great. And you're a weirdo. So we don't want to be this, engage in toxic positivity, as I called it. And just like, I find that all the time with our work in schools, that for some reason teachers are bred to believe that they always have to be positive with their kids. So we have this huge bias on the mood meter where everybody's always in the yellow. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Brackett's in the yellow today. I'm feeling fabulous. And that's like September 5th. And then like March 27th, good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but I'm ecstatic today. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I'm eager. I'm whatever. And it's like, so your kids, meaning your students, have seen you like this, you're like one note person. They don't see a real human being because we think that we always have to be that positive person in that yellow quadrant. And then they start doing the same thing, right? You're teaching them, right? You're the role model. So then they don't tell you how they're really feeling. They say, great, fine, happy. And so nobody gets a big vocabulary and everybody's kind of being phony with each other. And so the question is how, like, what has to happen? What are the shifts that we need to make? And the Center for Emotional Intelligence has a vision, which is to use the power of emotions to create a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. I'm going to argue today, and I'll do this probably for my whole life, that the first step is giving ourselves and everyone we love, and even the people we don't love that much, the permission to feel. So think about that for a minute. When I present to you this concept that I have spent a lot of time thinking about, permission to feel, what does it mean to you? That's not a rhetorical question, by the way. I have tons of things to say about this, just so you know. I'm curious. Permission to feel. Accept the way you feel. Don't have to put on a front. It's okay not to be okay. Valuing honesty over positivity. It's been a focus. Stop checking in. Demonstrate a full range of emotion. There isn't a right or wrong. Allow to display emotions without fear. It's okay to show and talk about your emotions. Nice. So think about the difference between, let's say, myself. I'll make myself, a dad who's going to work, and I had a fight with my colleague at work. And I come home from work and I look off, and my son says, "How's it going, Dad?" I'm like, "Oh, I want to talk about it." End of conversation, right? Versus come home from work, "Dad, everything all right? You look a little different today." "Honey, you're not going to believe it. I had the biggest fight with one of my colleagues today. It was terrible. I can't even," and I said something that I cannot believe that I said to this person. And I feel terrible about it. And I'm trying to think, what am I going to say to this person tomorrow to let them know that I, feel bad about it? And I'm also trying to think about, like, why did I get so activated? And, what I might do about that next time. And also, like, how am I going to repair our relationship? Let's just stop there for a minute. What has happened? Right. A, Daddy feels. B, Daddy is comfortable talking about feelings, especially the unpleasant ones. C, Daddy reflects. D, Daddy thinks about ways of helping or apologizing and, asking for forgiveness. E, Daddy shares his experiences. I mean, literally, that was in like 30 seconds. I've now kind of been exposing my kid to almost all the skills of emotional intelligence. And so how many of us grew up that way? I don't know about you, but like I grew up with my parents love me, God bless them. But like my mother, she was more anxious than you can imagine. Oh my God, you're being bullied. Don't tell me the details. I'll have a breakdown. I'm like, thanks, Mom. And by the way, I'm the one having the breakdown, just so you know. And then my father, who was this tough guy from New York, son, toughen up. Okay, Dad, thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for the strategy. And so there was no permission to feel. There was no critical thinking about feelings, labeling feelings. Now, I share this with you because I was blessed in life. Well, I had early trauma. I had abuse in my childhood. I was blessed that my mother had a brother who I'll call Uncle Marvin, which is his real name, who was a teacher in upstate New York, who happened to be writing a curriculum to teach kids feelings through social studies, who happened to be getting a master's degree in my hometown in New Jersey, where I grew up. And we'd sit in the backyards when I was around 12 years old, and he would interview me about these feeling words that he would call them, like alienation and feeling, committed and loyal and ecstatic and elated. And then we share stories around times in our life when we felt that way. And he was the first adult that I shared my darkest secrets with. And I wondered, what was it about Uncle Marvin that made me open up to him? And I realized he was the adult who gave me the permission to feel. And so I ask all of you, as you think about this term, did you have an Uncle Marvin? Not everybody does. If you had an Uncle Marvin or Aunt Marina, what were their characteristics? Take a moment and think of patient, humble, listened, warm, approachable, genuine, non-judgmental. Nice. It's very interesting. When my book came out a year and a half ago or so, I was on a book tour, and I was giving a talk in Westchester County in New York. And I never really talked a lot about my uncle. I would share that, he was my inspiration, who got me involved in the work, but I wouldn't go into my story. But now that it came out in my book, I was more just talking about it more. And I would ask people this provocative question, did you have an Uncle Marvin? Who was your Uncle Marvin? And one of the most magical things happened to me in one of my presentations, which is I had talked about my uncle, 6th grade social studies teacher, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden this guy jumps out of his seat. He's like, Mark, your Uncle Marvin was my Uncle Marvin. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, your Uncle Marvin was my 6th grade social studies teacher 45 years ago. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, firstly, you can't go anywhere because I got to interview you, because I've never really met one of my uncle's real students. And then I interviewed him afterwards. And it was like, he knew more about my uncle than I remembered about all of my education. He's like, I'll never forget your uncle's eyes. I'll never forget your uncle's facial expression. I'll never forget the way he welcomed kids into the classroom. I'll never forget how he did all these things with feeling words. And then we went back to the history, like the Roman oligarchy, and went back to our personal lives, and we went back to this and back to this. It was just remarkable. So we can't underestimate, right, the power of that connection. And now he was a superintendent of a school district. And he said, I'm convinced that my experience in your uncle's class is the reason why I became an educator today. I can't prove it, but that's what it is. So as we think about these characteristics, compassionate, empathic, non-judgmental, supportive, validating, having unconditional love, I ask you right now, by the way, you can be your own Uncle Marvin. Are you, during these challenging times, being self-compassionate, showing empathy for yourself, being non-judgmental about your own feelings? Now, it's pretty interesting. A couple months ago now, I was doing this TV thing, and I was talking to the producer, and he asked me about, like, why do you do the work? And I shared my story, and I've got more and more comfortable as I've gotten older being vulnerable. If I had written my book 10 years ago, I wouldn't have shared my story. And I was sharing a little bit about my childhood, and he's like, can we talk about the science now? And I realized how uncomfortable he was becoming because of my disclosure. And it was very eye-opening for me. I'm certainly not gonna the compassionate emotion scientist doesn't keep pouring out information to someone who's gonna have a nervous breakdown from you sharing it with them. So it's there's this nuance, right? In terms of discerning, where do you go with this information and with whom? That's part of emotional intelligence. But also, I recognized in my career that there are people who lead with their hearts, and there are people who lead more with their heads, and people who just want the data. And so oftentimes when I'm doing my pitches for ruler to superintendents and educational leaders, I do a little bit of the story, but I do a lot more of the science because they want the data, right, to prove that doing this is worthwhile and important. And so we're going to jump there now. And so what I'm here to tell you is that emotions matter for everything. And you could read for the rest of your life all the scientific studies that have been done on the link between emotion and things like memory and attention. By way of example, I stand before you now as I'm a full professor at a university, and I was a C&D student growing up. Terrible student. I hated school. And I hated school because I was bullied and bored. And when I was bullied, which was too often, think about it. How are you going to concentrate taking a test when you don't feel safe in that classroom, or when you don't feel safe on your way home? It's biologically impossible now. We know that from the research. So for those who say, what does it have to do with learning? It's your emotion system is either going to be in learning mode or in survival mode. And when it's in survival mode, it ain't in learning mode. That applies to decision making as well. Let me ask you, has anyone here made a bad decision over the last 9 months? Like a poor choice, around food or exercise or sleep time, or indulging in social media, or watching 60 episodes of a Netflix series, or saying something because you've been triggered. And I'm guilty of all of them. I don't do the Netflix thing because I have terrible attention. Relationship quality. Think about that. Emotions are signals to approach or avoid. I'll repeat that. Emotions are signals to approach or avoid. And by the way, Nancy, there's nothing wrong with it. If it brings you joy, go for it. Emotions are signals to approach or avoid. I should say only if you're escaping, right? For 60 episodes, by the way, is a lot of episodes. So you're probably avoiding something. Emotions are signals to approach or avoid. Like I said earlier, people's facial expressions, approach, avoid. A classroom, you walk in, you look around, approach, ooh, this energy is off, avoid. Mental health, creativity. Think about this for a minute. Emotions are the drivers of the creative process. Think about emotions fuel our creative ideas, but our ability to deal with our emotions determines whether or not that fuel becomes fire. What do I mean by that? Well, has anyone here ever taught a student who you just knew was super talented and capable, but they couldn't get out of their own way? That's not because of their intellect, right? It's because of their emotions, right? The frustration, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the disappointment, the anger. If you can't manage your feelings, right, on your journey towards achieving your goals, oftentimes you give up on the goal. Not because you're not cognitively able to do it, but because you're emotionally not capable to deal with the feelings that are all part of that process. So, big question for you. Are you an emotion scientist? Or are you an emotion judge? The scientist is open and curious and reflective. The judge sees emotions as error, as noise, closed to feeling. The emotion scientist is, yeah, wow, I don't know. Am I feeling down or disappointed? Am I hopeless or feeling despair? Am I elated or am I ecstatic? The clumper is fine or feels like shit. The emotion scientist, like, for example, my mother-in-law got trapped with us during COVID, and she's from Panama. And so there were no trips back to Panama. She came right before the crisis, and then boom, no flights back to Panama. I thought it was gonna be 1 month, and it was 3 months, and it was 7 months. By the 5th month, I'm like, all right, somebody's moving out. And I was like, I gotta go to one of the richest people I know and like get a charter plane or something like that. Like, this woman needs to leave. And one night we were at dinner and she looked at me and she's like, are you really the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence? And I was like, not tonight. Didn't go well. And I went upstairs that night and I'm like, Mark, like, you're supposed to be like the feelings master. You know, what's going on here? And my threshold, I was tired, I was overwhelmed. And there's a choice in that matter. Like, do you forgive yourself? Do you apologize? Do you say, like, what happened and how could I do this differently? Right? That's all that growth mindset. And then there's that fixed mindset approach to it, right? Which is what? Mark, you suck at regulating. You've always sucked at regulating. Like, this is just what it is. Kind of like my father was. My father had terrible anger management issues. He would just go from 0 to 100 and just like lose it. And, you know, he would say things like, son, this is who I am. Get used to it. Yeah, Dad, got used to it. 10 years of therapy and a PhD in psychology. And so I'm going to ask us to go into breakout rooms now for a couple of minutes. And just, I want you to explore in your group. Like, are you an emotion scientist or are you an emotion judge? Are there times when you're a scientist? Are there times when you're a judge? What characteristics are missing from this list? Okay, we're gonna do that for just about 4 minutes. And thank you, Laura. So what do you think? Feel like you're an emotion scientist, emotion judge? You know, maybe there's the public, well, I kind of like to think of myself as an emotion scientist, but like, actually, I'm pretty much an emotion judge. I hate to say this, but I am more of an emotion judge than an emotion scientist. And I don't like myself for it. But I'm like that mostly with other people. Like, what are you getting so angry about? Like, get over it. It's like, really? That's really helpful, Mark. And so, or when I'm feeling very, very strong emotions, I feel like it's never going to go away. That principle of ephemerality, knowing like that, this too shall pass, or like, will this issue really be a problem for me in 5 years from now or 1 year from now? Like taking that hot air balloon perspective. So I think, what I want to just say is that this is life's work, and that we have to like strive to be that emotion scientist. It doesn't like, you don't just become one. Every emotion has its own trajectory. Every relationship has its own trajectory. So when we think about emotional intelligence, we can't just think about it in terms of like, I'm good at dealing with my feelings. It's like, I'm good with dealing with some feelings in some contexts with some people. Any key points that came out of your conversations?
Mark, I can start.
Please.
So I was talking about how I've been to like so many of your book talks and these other talks, and like I've read your book, I've been teaching it in my class, and I've been trying to do a much better job at asking people, how are you? No, really, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say like 80% of the people that I asked that to were like, what? Like, why are you asking me that? Whether it's like my students or family members or friends, there's like this suspicion when I'm genuinely asking how they are, to the point where my sister was like, I'm not going to do that with you right now. She thinks I'm trying to analyze her or something. So I need to like either change my tone that I don't know that I have when I ask that, or like figure out a way to ask, how are you feeling really, without using those words to like put people on the spot, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's interesting. Maybe you become like an overzealous emotion scientist.
Definitely. It's like way overzealous. I gotta figure out how to dial it down a little bit.
Right. You're like that, by the way, in our own center, it's like that. Sometimes I'm like, we're not talking about feelings today. We're actually going to work. And so, I think you're right. It can be really complicated. And, it also, you have to really watch your affect when you're doing it. Like I had an aunt who was like, is everything okay? And you'd be like, well, it was, but you just spooked me out. So like, I'm not sure anymore. And so you just want to be careful, like about like that zealotness and your tone of voice. And then also you need to like play with it a little bit. You can't be like asking the same question every time. So like, hey, what was the, how did it go last night? And what was going on here? And like, try to like be more variable. I think that can help. And don't ask it every time you're together. Any other thoughts about this? Any other questions or comments?
I have a thought. I think I tend to be more of an emotional scientist to others.
Yeah.
And more an emotional judge to me.
Yeah.
I think
that's very common.
Yeah.
Much more, like a lot of counselors and psychologists and clinicians, right? They're so good with their patients and their clients, but like they're a mess, themselves. And so I think that's oftentimes the case. Yeah. It's easier to be compassionate to other people than it is to yourself. So that leads us to the skills, las habilidades of emotional intelligence. We call them ruler: recognize, understand, label, express, regulate. And obviously in our trainings and in my book, I have a whole chapter on each one of these 5 skills. Recognizing emotions in self and others. Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What are the words specifically? Can I express how I'm feeling? Will people listen? Is it safe? What's my strategy for regulating? So let me ask you a question. I'm going to actually do Jane will help me with this. I'm going to give away a free book to the person who gets this right. What is the psychological difference between anxiety, fear, and stress. Thank you, Laura. There is nothing. Nancy, come on, I'm a professor. I'm not going to make it like that simple. What is the psychological difference? No cheating. You got to write anxiety equals stress equals the target of the emotion, ownership. But the definitions, how do you differentially define them? Here's the host, how we respond. Anxiety is about future, fear is current. Anxiety is past. Got some controversy going on here. All right, looks like I saved myself 15 bucks. So, anxiety, uncertainty. We're anxious when we see the world as being uncertain. Like when COVID hit, a lot of anxiety. Fear, impending danger. We got that one right there for Andrea. Stress, too many demands and not enough resources. So you're just like depleted. So they're different, right? Now, does it? That wasn't a rhetorical question, by the way. Does it matter?
You froze for a second, so I think people may have missed the question.
Oh, thank you. I said, does it matter? Does it matter to be granular? All right, yes, yes, yes. So why does it matter?
Can somebody get a book for answering that one correctly?
Yeah, because the strategy that we would use to manage might be completely different, right? If you're anxious about the uncertain future, right, you might be better prepared for the future by doing something. If you're feeling fear about something that's right in front of your eyes and you think it's danger, you might have to do something else. If you're like many of us, stressed out because we're like depleted from like trying to figure out how to stay afloat, you probably need something else. So a few things about emotion regulation. Oops. Well, let's do that one first. Yeah, there, just like I said earlier, there's no good or bad emotion. There is degrees. So stress, for example, there's good stress. That's stress that pushes you to be creative in your lesson plan. And then there's distress, the stress that makes it hard for you to get up in the morning, the stress that makes you feel like you just are burnt out. And that's why we have to become emotion scientists around even our stress levels. We have to be curious. Is this like functional stress, like that one being challenged and it feels good? Or is the stress that's making my body and brain kind of fall apart? And I think it's important to just talk a little bit about emotion regulation, right? It's specific to the emotion. Like for me, when I'm angry, I'm kind of like, oh, get over it, Mark, like whatever. But when I'm anxious, it's like a horror show. Because, you know, I had a lot of anxiety growing up and I just never learned great strategies. And so I ruminate a lot, I perseverate, I catastrophize. And so for me, anxiety is a more difficult emotion, right, than sadness or anger. Everyone's going to be different. It's specific to the person, meaning that, I like certain strategies. For example, my martial arts was a big thing for me. I stopped teaching that because I didn't want to get hurt anymore. Now I like yoga, but I really only like like rigorous hot yoga. I don't like all the yoga because I find it boring. That's like you shouldn't even care. But I'm just sharing this with you because like exercise is a strategy, but it's like finding the exercise that works best for you based on who you are, not what everybody thinks you should be doing. It's like self-talk, like what you say to yourself to calm down. Some people like affirmations. Some people like simple words. Some people like to visualize their peaceful place. It's not for me to decide, it's for me to offer. And the goal of emotion regulation is to help you explore the range of strategies that work best for you to achieve your goals. And this is related to all kinds of things, culture, personality. I'm an introvert. So for me, going out to a sports bar, like where everybody's screaming, drinking beer, and watching shows, like sports shows, it's like a nightmare. I'd rather be put into a psych ward. I just can't deal right with all this. It's too overwhelming for me. Where other people like, come on, let's go to a bar, let's go see a game. I'm like, go see a game? Like, who are you? But again, no judgment. I sound a little judgmental there. But my point is, it's like, you got to know what works best for you. You got to know what works best for your kids. And you got to help them find those strategies. You got to learn. You got to practice. Remember, it's not about control. Remember, you got to be an emotion scientist and ask yourself, is it really working? And remember, I think probably the most important thing I can share with you today, there's no correctness. There's no such thing as the right strategy, as I said earlier this morning or this afternoon. Let me stop there and take any questions about emotion regulation. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Any questions so far?
I think sometimes I miscalculate emotional regulation with emotional judging. So like I feel like we do a lot of work in school around emotional regulation, but in order to do that, we have to like contain first. And so that doesn't feel very emotionally scientisty. It feels more judgy.
Say that again. I'm sorry. Repeat that.
I feel that we do a lot of work in schools around emotional regulation. I think we, but I feel like sometimes it's about containment.
It's like the control piece.
Yes, exactly. So, and it feels like you have to be emotionally judgy to be able to contain or control. And so I'm just in this conversation as we're exploring your thoughts and your comments, I'm kind of questioning my interpretation and understanding of emotional regulation and the work that we do around that.
Yeah. And so the goal of emotion regulation from an emotional intelligence perspective is to use your emotions wisely, not to control them, to achieve well-being, healthy relationships, make good decisions and goals. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because oftentimes even social emotional learning gets misconstrued that it's about like making kids who are disruptive sit still. And to me, that's like the weirdest, most craziest interpretation of social emotional learning. And so I urge us all to really think about the goal of emotion regulation is to help children explore based on who they are, their cultural background, their personality, where they're at, what thoughts and what actions will serve them best. And so that's a different framework. And then we know there's different kinds of strategies, right? There are breathing exercises, right? Some people think of breathing as a religion. I always think like, I don't know, I was born breathing. And so I don't think it's a religious practice, but we know that deep breathing helps to lower heart temperature and deactivate the sympathetic nervous system, help us with our parasympathetic nervous system so we can be able to use our cognitive abilities to engage in more positive self-talk. There is like just doing things you enjoy. Like I've really, not right now because it's freaking freezing, but during COVID in the beginning, like April, May, June, July, I took more walks than I've taken in my whole life. I just discovered like, well, Mark, you actually live by the Long Island Sound. Mark, there are actually parks near your house. Mark, you can be physically distant and be outside and enjoy yourself. And it was wonderful. And that's now a new, like, that's one of my new tools in my, strategy box. There's that social piece of emotion regulation. Knowing that the mere presence of someone who you feel comfortable with is a form of emotion regulation. There is the cognitive stuff that we talked about, the self-criticism and positive self-talk. There's like managing your life smartly. It's like, are your routines working for you? Like, are you going to bed too late? Are you getting up too early? Are you getting up too late? Do you build in a structure where you have an actual meal? The other day I was, I had meetings all day long and I was eating lunch while I was on Zoom and I realized I don't even think I chewed. I actually don't think I chewed my food. I think I just like swallowed chunks. Can anyone relate to that? And it's like, I try to make these commitments like like Mark, give yourself the space to like do a little mindfulness, while you're eating, like taste your food, chew your food, allow your body to digest. And then I don't want to waste the time. So, I double dip and triple dip. And then I'm bloated and tired, but that's not your business to know. So this is a journey. It involves giving ourselves that permission to feel, becoming that emotion scientist, developing the skills, practicing and refining those strategies from physical activity to physiological downregulation, to our cognitive strategies, to our relationship building strategies, to managing our lives in ways that make it meaningful. And we're going to have time together again in the summer. So let me wrap up by just saying a few last things. And then I'll take a few questions. I'll make sure I have it. Just do 1 minute wrap up. And I'll be sending you these links out. Oops. Okay. So one is, there's a mood meter app. If you're interested in kind of playing with the mood meter more, you can download the app. We're actually going to be uploading a new app in a couple of months, but you can get this one and then upgrade. 2 is, I was telling Jane that we as a center have created a course that's called Managing Emotions in Times of Uncertainty and Stress that is available for free to every educator across the United States. So if you want to take this 1.5 hour kind of workshop and blow it up and have time to process and reflect, please go to Coursera.org. It's free. Type in Managing Emotions in Times of Uncertainty and Stress, and it will be there for you, and I'll send out the link to that. Lastly, I do lots of different things, and some of you brought them up. Right now I'm doing a virtual book club. Actually, it's tonight, starting at 7. And what I do is I take people on a journey for about 6 weeks on each of the chapters, and we discuss them, and I answer difficult questions so people can learn more and go deeper. I also have different resources. For example, on Instagram, I do what's called the Feeling Words of the Week. So this week's words were, what's the difference between feeling at ease and feeling relieved? Last week was, what's the difference between hopeful and optimistic? And so that's every week, and you can just sign up for that. And let me wrap up with a quote. One of my favorites by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is space. And that space is our power to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom. So I hope this was enjoyable. I'll end by saying one last thing. Oftentimes people come to me and say, Mark, you had a lot of trauma, you were bullied, you're a terrible student, but look at you, you've made it. I'm like, well, I don't know about that, but whatever. And what I tell people is that, right, you don't really know anyone until you know their story. You know that. And so with all the kind of unpleasant experiences, I had Uncle Marvin. It's a big deal. I had the martial arts. My parents knew to get me a therapist. I was able to go to college. I rediscovered my interest in psychology. I was able to get a doctorate in psychology, able to work as an academic and do research and build programs. And so I put a lot of effort, right, into my healthy emotional development. And I share that with you because when I walk around our nation, or used to anyway, and I'd visit schools all over the place, I'd look at these kids and I'd say, are you going to have all those things happen for you to ensure that you have the permission to feel, to ensure that you have the skill that you need? And I'm not convinced that every kid is going to have that experience. And so I'll end by saying it really is our moral obligation to do this work. And what that really means is that it is our moral obligation as the adults who are raising and teaching kids to be the best possible role models. And so on that note, hope you enjoyed my little hour and a half with you, and may you have a wonderful end of the day Thursday. Yep. Thank you for that cute bug. And I look forward to seeing you again. And I'm happy to stay an extra 2 minutes or so if you have any burning questions. And I'll turn it back to you, Jane.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for being here. I've been hearing a few comments from people to me directly that this has been incredibly compelling, and I think people are impressed at your social presence on Zoom. And so thank you very much. It is remarkable that a field that relies on humans working together at so many levels does not include that the education of those professionals does not include emotions and how to understand emotions. So it's an enormous contribution, not only to education, but to our society. So I do want to thank you for that. And I want us to give jazz hands as a thank you. And there's lots of things coming. And we will be in touch with about, so first of all, there's the book. Please, think about buying that, and the proceeds, as I understand it, go to Good Works. And so that feels great. Mark mentioned the course, and also there's a survey. And so we're trying to get that survey out to as many teachers as possible in Essex County, so we can kind of get a dashboard view of the county on how teachers are feeling. And Mark will come back in the summer, probably at the ECLC Summer Institute, and you'll all be invited, if you came today, to hear the results of that survey. And if there are questions that come up in between now and then, feel free to share those with us, and we can talk to Mark about what's come up for you and can build that into your next presentation. Somebody said they just bought the book during the presentation.
Very sweet, thank you.
So, and yes, for those of you who have attended, the recording will be available, but we ask that you keep it just to your own district and not spread it around, because this is really Mark's intellectual property. And as you can see, it's been a lifetime of work, and we don't steal that. So it is just so great to see all of you. Mark, thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we will see you again soon.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.